What is a standby letter of credit? Standby letter of credit. A standby letter of credit is a guarantee that is made by a bank on behalf of a client, which ensures payment will be made, even if their client cannot fulfill the payment. It is a payment of last resort from the bank, and ideally, is never meant to be used. SBLC is issued by the bank to secure the payments and delivery of the goods. Difference between simple LC and standby LC. Both the regular letter of credit and standby letter of credit are payment instruments used in international trade. However, there are some basic differences in the product which we will discuss in the following post. Meaning: simple letter of credit. A letter of credit is a promise from the bank that the buyer, i.e. importer, will fulfill his payment obligation and pay the full invoice amount on time. A role of the issuing bank is to make sure that the buyer pays. In case the buyer is unable to fulfill his obligation, the bank will pay to the seller, i.e. the exporter, but the funds come from the buyer. Standby letter of credit. On the other hand, a standby letter of credit is a secondary payment method where bank guarantees the payment when terms of the letter of credit are fulfilled by the seller. It is a kind of additional safety net for the seller. The buyer may not pay the seller due to multiple reasons such as cash flow crunch, dishonesty, bankruptcy, etc. But as long as the seller meets the requirement of a standby letter of credit, the bank will pay. It is a kind of additional safety net for the seller. Features within the instrument. The letter of credit does not have any specific features that the buyer must adhere to for completion of a transaction. It does have basic requirements such as documentation, packing, etc. But all in all, it's a plain vanilla payment instrument. Features within the instrument. A standby letter of credit may have specific clauses that the buyer must fulfill so he can use this instrument. For example, Mr. X, who resides in the UK, agrees to buy 6,000 pairs of gloves from Mr. Y, who resides in Canada. Mr. X does not want to take the risk, so he asks Mr. Y to get a standby letter of credit. Mr. X obtains a standby letter of credit from HSBC Bank and he adds following clauses. A. The material of the gloves should be 70% cotton, 30% polyester. B. Each pair should be packed in a clear plastic bag having the logo tag. C. There can be only 1.5% defect margin, i.e. only 1.5 pairs of defective gloves in 100 pairs is acceptable. Mr. Y should fulfill all the above-mentioned performance criteria to be eligible for payment through a standby letter of credit. A regular letter of credit cannot have such performance criteria. The requirement of issuing bank. When issuing the letter of credit, the bank checks the buyer's credibility and credit score. Furthermore, it is usually the case that a buyer asks his banker for a letter of credit, i.e. the buyer is usually dealing with the said bank for a long time. So the letters of credit are usually unsecured. Equally, a standby letter of credit creates an obligation for the bank. Therefore, the bank will require a collateral in the form of security to issue a standby letter of credit. Goal. The letter of credit is a primary instrument of payment. So the goal is to use the letter of credit to complete the transaction. In contrast, a standby letter of credit is a secondary instrument of payment. If a seller is paid by a standby letter of credit, it means that something went wrong. The goal here for all the parties involved is to avoid using standby letter of payment. Time period. Letter of credit is a short-term instrument, where the expiry is usually 90 days. A standby letter of credit is a long-term instrument, in which the validity is usually 1 year or so. Purpose. A letter of credit is used to provide security for a transaction such as a sale agreement. A standby letter of credit is often used to provide security for long-term obligations such as a long-term construction project. A standby letter of credit is used for long-term obligation and is used mostly in construction projects. Geographical scope. A letter of credit is usually used in an international transaction where the buyer is the importer and the seller is the exporter. A standby letter of credit is used in an international transaction, but it is also frequently used in domestic transactions as well. Its scope is not limited to any geographical area. Cost. A standby letter of credit is more expensive than a regular letter of credit. while the fees of a regular letter of credit range from 0.75% to 1.5% of the amount covered. The bank may charge anywhere between 1% to 10% to cover the same amount under a standby letter of credit. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please thumbs up, share this video and subscribe my channel for more useful videos.